and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm Evie Barrett, Deputy News Editor, and today I'm joined by two special guests from Uncommon Creative Studio, the renowned creative agency which made a splash earlier this year when it launched a PR, culture and influence practice. Uncommon is the 14th largest creative agency in the UK, according to Campaign's latest School Reports project, and is known for having worked on huge ad campaigns for brands like H&M, The Ordinary and JD Sports. A few months ago, it launched a PR practice with intentions of, quote, carving out a new space in a tied category, according to Uncommon founder Nils Leonard. Joining to lead the division was Randy Manicks, who previously spent 5 years as managing director at comms agency John Doe. Here chatting with me today, we have both Nils and Randy. Hi both, great to be speaking with you. How are you doing?
Hi, good. How you doing?
Hello. This is fun. That quote I said is still getting me into trouble, I see.
Is it? Well, we'll jump into that and maybe you can justify it. It's been around 3 months since the launch announcement, so how's it all going so far?
I mean, God, it's weird even thinking that it's only been 3 months. I think that's the crazy part, but it's been brilliant, I think. I mean, obviously you get a quote out from Nils that says the PR category is tired and all the requests come through. So actually I feel like it's done what people may have thought the opposite effect for us. No, it's been absolutely brilliant. I think we've definitely seen such great interest from clients and from the industry, to be honest. I think it was a good discussion point. And yeah, I just think now we're just planning for the next year and it's been such good momentum. So
it's been awesome. I think it's been awesome. There's a very, very fine line, I think, here at the studio between really all of our different types of output. You know, if I'm honest, like we don't sit and go, well, that one's an advert and that one's PR and that one's design and that one's an experience. And so it's been amazing. But the groundswell and the energy that Randy's built and got around this practice within the studio is huge. So we're over the moon. We're just trying to make the most of it. The word to describe it is it's gone from that fear of, oh my God, will anyone knock on the door, to, oh shit, I really hope we don't screw this stuff up, because some of the opportunities are amazing.
I think, yeah, the kind of comms industry as a whole seems to be becoming a lot more integrated, so that makes complete sense. What exactly do you think it is about modern PR agencies that perhaps you guys can do differently than Nils? Obviously, as you mentioned, you made a bit of a stir by calling PR a tired category. How are you kind of trying to change that?
I'll open that up if I can and just blurb for a bit. I mean, I'm sure that came across as a bit wanky, and I'm kind of sorry if it did, but I'm pretty sure as well that a lot of the people in that category are looking at it, scratching their heads, kind of going, actually, how far can we go with this? And where is it going? And does it feel a bit like Groundhog Year? And I say this because I was lucky enough in the position we're in to sit in a few pitches as an advisor really to some of our clients. And I honestly can't tell you how cynically I thought that a lot of the PR crews that were approaching it. And really the question that sat behind that, which is for me when I was watching this, and I didn't remark on tremendous amounts of it, but it just hit me quite deeply, which is I don't think many of them really believed that they were important, if I'm really honest. They were trying to win a piece of business. They were trying to do that bit of work. They would show the deck with the 7 ideas in. One of them would be a garden party with some special build chairs. And that's not me just pissing from the outside in on the PR category. That's me being moved, I think, to some degree by how cynically they were approaching it. And that worried me. For the whole category, that worried me. In the same way, it worried me when networks were, underpricing ads and talking about content instead of quality communications, and all those things. So I looked at that on the one hand and really started to scratch my head and go, there's something missing here. The other thing that dawned on me was a lot of them had relegated themselves, I think, to a place where they were just trying to win opening weekend. They were just trying to get a bit of fame for that brand, almost irrelevant of the brand positioning and narrative, kind of irrelevant really of any great shakes happening in culture. Do you know what I mean? They were hopping on memes, but that's not the same thing as looking at the world and asking yourself how they might play a part in it. And so I also thought there was clear space to do something far more meaningful, or to try to do something far more meaningful, where you were going to try to make work that wouldn't just win opening weekend, but that would have classical implications in 3 to 5 to 7 to 10 years. And I'm not saying we'll always do that, but the act of swinging for it, I can tell you now, is original in that category. Lastly, what really got me was just, honestly, we get 2 or 3 calls a week. And this is the real telling thing. And so these are not my words. These are almost the words of almost every partner that we work with here, where they're like, do you know anybody in that space? Do you guys do it? Because there wasn't anybody in that space speaking that language. with that level of ambition, I think. And I think everybody feels that. I don't think you need me to call that out. I think there's a bunch of companies doing great work in the PR space, but I think very few of them are swinging for that place.
Yeah, super interesting. So what did you kind of make of the response from the PR industry then when that story went live and obviously some people started talking on LinkedIn and stuff like that?
Well, defensive. I wanted someone to not respond on LinkedIn and to just show me 6 things that I'd missed. And they didn't. I talk about it at our studio. Randy will tell you I talk about it in as many industries as I can. Don't mistake an opinion on LinkedIn for output. If you had the output to talk about, I wouldn't be saying it. You know, it's as much leveled at me as it is at everybody else. I honestly looked at it and went, being scared of us or do you know what I mean? Let me just get this out. Like, never mind being scared of Uncommon or We're Coming. All these people in the PR industry right now should be scared of what brands are doing themselves. Because I think most of these brands are doing better work themselves, far more meaningful work, far more original work, far more disruptive work than any of the PR agencies are bringing to their doors. And, you know, I think that if the industry were booming and heading forward and making original, creative, provocative reference points, well, then we wouldn't be opening a studio, candidly. So I look at it and go brands like Patagonia, you know, with the Vote the Assholes Out label. I look at it and go Liquid Death, what they pretty much do week in, week out. I look at Barbie, I look at Lego, I look at Jacquemus. You know, never mind us and the work we're talking about. Look at the different shapes and brands and the nature of the way these brands are going into the world. You know, the PR industry should be scared, not necessarily of Uncommon, but just in general.
And Randy, as someone who's spent a lot of time at PR agencies, what's your view on all of this? Do you take that criticism as a challenge? And is that kind of what spurred you on to take a role at Uncommon?
I mean, I think I agree with Nils. I think the response I was a little bit disappointed in. I'm the biggest champion of PR and obviously why I do what I do. And I did expect someone to come in and go, actually, F off, Nils. You don't know what you're talking about. This is exactly why PR is at the top of their league, or really just back what we do. But I think I actually didn't say this I don't think I've told you this, Nils, but about maybe 2.5 years ago, I actually wrote down on a piece of paper somewhere that that Uncommon should really start a PR arm and I was going to do it. But I think for me personally, for a long time, I really just wanted to reposition PR as a bit of a creative force and really put it back on the map. I think, Evie, we've talked about this. I think we don't shout about ourselves enough as an industry. We're too kind of scared to, and we're too kind of sit back and let. And I think this is what the ad industry does so well. Some of the most culturally instinctive thinkers in our industry come from PR. But the problem, I don't think, is talent. I think it's structure. And I think that's where the industry is tired. PR still gets treated as amplification at the end of the process instead of influence right at the beginning of it. And so even though we hear so many conversations and debates about how the internet and social media has completely changed the mechanics of attention, and I talk about this and wang about it way too much, because culture, and as we talk about the modes of culture and how it's activated, it's so participatory right now. When you put something out there in the world, people take it and they remix it themselves. You know, they parody them, they pass them through communities, they use them as signals of identity, and attention, I think, behaves much more like fandom than media consumption. Yet a lot of the industry is still optimizing for coverage and really, I guess, fairly old systems that we come at the end of the funnel. We've got the ideas and, you know, okay, how do we PR this? And I hate that. I think I read a really interesting article about the death of just PR this, and I can't agree with it more. And I think this is the thing that excited me about coming to Uncommon and just having the first conversation with the founders was here. Earned attention isn't the after party. It's part of the creative process itself. And I think, why wouldn't I take a role like that, coming to one of the world's best creative studios and being able to sit there and have a real seat at the table to shape that thinking right from the start? I think that's how brilliant work gets out the door. And being able to move at pace and the scale that Uncommon operates at, you know, I think we haven't quite cracked that, I don't believe. And obviously, I'm sure someone out there will probably say, no, but Randy, I think we have. And I'm absolutely happy to have that argument. But, you know, I don't think we're asking at Uncommon, how do we publicize this once the creators have got to the idea? We're asking much earlier, is this interesting enough to become part of a culture in the first place? And then actually working out with the right teams and having that access to the right budget to activate properly. I think PR doesn't necessarily get that. I think that's quite sexy and exciting for someone in PR to come in and go, I'd like to spend a couple of mil on activating this properly. And so honestly, I think when you start in that place, the work changes completely for me. And already being in the front door and in the last, 6 months of being here, I can't believe how much work has gone out the door. And I feel like it is insane how much work moves out, and it just at such a high standard, and weirdly how much I've touched. But so I think, yeah, I mean, in a very long-winded way, I think that's why I've come to Uncommon, and it feels like such an exciting move, particularly as I feel like we're probably one of the first studios to really embrace that integrated form of thinking. We can't operate in silos anymore. Ad agencies want to do PR and social. PR agencies want to do ads and content. And so it's like, why aren't we doing it all? And I think we're in a position to do it, but also just do it really, really well. So
sorry, there's a lot there, isn't there? I mean, it's great, it's wicked, but the temptation, I think, is to describe this as an integrated play, or look at the diagram of it and ask yourself how many buckets we play in. I think the question that's been missing from this industry, but from the design industry and from the ad industry, is, well, what are you headed toward once you've decided what those buckets are? The buckets isn't the thing. And I think that's the thing that Uncommon has, right or wrong, our delusion and the audacity to imagine that we might matter, that we might not be this silent advisor, that we might be these people who have a unique relationship with culture and an ability to disrupt and attract people and provoke them in a way that others don't, and that would make us precious and would make us rare and brilliant partners. And I think we have a very mechanized view of that. And I think that whatever bucket you decide to describe yourself in, I would argue that the majority of the PR industry as it currently stands don't believe, and they should.
You talk about how much kind of work that you guys have already put out from a PR perspective. Is that kind of with existing clients, or have you started winning pure PR clients? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think in the initial stages, the natural momentum came from working with existing clients. I think, as Nils kind of mentioned before, the demand was just there. And I think clients really weren't asking, how do we land coverage? It was more, how do we make our brands matter? We're spending a lot of money, but nothing's quite sticking. What's the bigger idea? How do we actually connect with people more meaningfully? How do we make our brands matter? And PR, not in the traditional sense, but in an earned sense, how do we actually do that in a very strategic way? But whilst doing that, we've definitely since launch seen a lot of clients now come to us. Sadly, I can't actually talk about the new wins.
I was about to say, I'm grinning because I'm like, I don't know what we're allowed to say. And so I'm like, I'll probably get really told off.
You say it, you'll get into trouble.
No, yeah, all right, I'm not doing that. Yeah, we've attracted some new clients. It's really, really exciting. As I said to you, honestly, the fear for me, Randy and I had this conversation, I don't know, a few days ago, before the weekend, and I was a bit like, shit, okay, we can't, this one is, there's a couple that are really, really good. And to that point about delusional believing that you can transform the scale at which you operate, some of the brands that came to us for that have gone, okay, go on then, let's see it. Now, I think we've got some examples, I would say this, whatever sphere you want to look at it from, in things like The Ordinary, Weirdly JD previously, and a few others, where whatever you describe that as, is it a narrative object? Is it some advertising? Is it comms? Is it PR? I don't know. But that work, plus I think Randy's drive and articulation of our take on the world has drawn some really interesting clients to us. So can't wait to wang on about them, but I'm not allowed yet. I'll get told off.
So is it mostly kind of clients coming to you rather than you guys pitching? Have you been in any kind of traditional PR pitches?
We have not, luckily to say. I think that's a really prestigious position to be in. I think we've got a powerhouse of a Nubis team. But I think, as Neil said, we've really been able to crack what I don't really like calling it a pitch, but what our point of distinction is. And clients have just agreed. I think we're really answering what clients want more of now. And I think when you've got the backing of a big studio with specialists and experts who really know and understand how to make brands matter, it's such an appealing offer. So yeah, it's exciting, man. I'm just like, let's go. How many more can we win? But I'm also like, we got to manage growth now. We've got to slow down a little bit.
I mean, look, it's always been something that sounds incredibly simple, but the studio's best new business tool is our work. I've always believed that. And I don't know how many people don't get their heads around that. But the majority of people, the reason we get those phone calls pretty much every week saying, hey, do you do PR, is I think a lot of people look at our work in the world and assume that's what it is. It doesn't matter to me what badge we put on it. And actually cementing this relationship in this sphere, and actually launching it with Randy has just given the majority of clients, I think, that little thing it needed to pick up the phone and go, let's try it. So we haven't taken part in a trad pitch, but I'd argue it's very clear in most spheres, be it design or advertising. If you want uncommon, you know what you want. You tend to know what you want. So we don't end up on a lot of pitches with a load of other people that don't do what we do, if I'm being really honest with you. And when we find ourselves on those pitches, we pretty quickly ask why we're there. I think it's even more marked in the PR industry, which is, I don't think you're going to come to us for a slightly different shade of garden party. I think you're going to come to us when you want to do something far more provocative or meaningful or original. And I think as a result, if we end up pitching, which we're not massively keen on, but if we do, I'm hoping it'll be against people who demonstrate a skill in that space, and a space that's more attuned to narrative, to a brand really mattering, to it making its difference, and to appearing in the world in more original ways.
Have you found there to be any friction with kind of your current clients where they have established relationships with PR agencies? Do you think that's been tricky at all?
Personally, no. I think their scope is really different to what we do. I mean, I've been here, only for 6 months so far, but I think a lot of the agencies that I see, the PR agencies that our clients are working with, has a scope that's a lot more, like I said, at that amplification stage where they're coming in and going, okay, we'll PR this in a limited capacity, whereas we're coming in and going, actually, we can help shape a lot of that thinking in a much, talking about what does that narrative look like? How do we actually give this idea more cultural meaning? How are we connecting with the audience? And it's a lot more higher level, which I think is a great place to be. Obviously, we would want to pitch and talk about how we can then, take that idea and make sure it sticks and travels, which that can be a bit of a fight over. But as far as I've seen, I mean, Nils, you jump in and share your thoughts on that because you have more experience of working with PR agencies over the time where they might be a little bit more gatekeepy.
We've always played well with others. We do that not because it's some sort of bullshit statement, but because we've realized from day one that we make better work when we tend to work with an entire organization and their partners. We tend to make more innovative work. We tend to be able to make work in different spaces. So we've learned to play really well with others. As long as the thing that we've angled for and the goal that we've set ourselves is achieved, we don't give a shit how many people are in the meeting room or who puts their name on it. It doesn't matter to us. What I would say is I imagine that has trod on some toes when there are people in the room going, if anybody is in the room with us and they assume we just make ad-like objects, then I think that probably does piss them off, because I'd argue 75% of our output isn't an advert anymore. And so I think if anybody's walking into that room assuming that that's the difference between their company and ours, they're probably going to find out pretty hard that that's not true. I think anybody open to benefiting from Uncommon's, ambition and audacity and some of the thinking that we have tend to make great partners. And we've partnered, I think, really well with some PR crews on some of our bigger clients. Equally, I think we tend to redefine a lot of the relationships our clients have with all their partner agencies. This is a similar conversation, honestly, to me in design, where people were like, do you just mean you design the assets for a campaign? And it's like, no, we're a pure play design practice. We have one of the best design leads in the world running it. And we've rebranded EA FC from FIFA. It's one of the biggest rebrands in entertainment history. So I think some of that may seem threatening. I think if you're a smart partner, you'll let Uncommon do the thing it does really well and work out how your company can play a part in that. And we would always do the same, vice versa. So the jury's out on that, but I would argue smarter partners play well with everybody around them.
And practically speaking, where does the PR arm kind of slot into your work? Obviously, I think when you launched, you said it was intended to be fully embedded within the creative process. So what does that look like, and what's the sort of team setup like?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think our intention at this stage, I know you kind of talked about headcount, like it's not about headcount theatre, as I like to call it, when people launch and they go, we've got 10 people in the team. But it really is, I think for me, more about getting the right experts in. I deliberately didn't want to build a traditional PR department. I think there's agencies out there who do that really well, but that stuff doesn't interest me. I really, the intention here was to build an earned first cultural practice and really redefine what that looked like. And more importantly, making sure it was truly embedded inside the studio, but start getting in spectrum of diverse specialists who really understand what it takes to build narratives, make ideas travel, and most importantly, stick. I talk a lot about how we're not really here to help brands being seen. Lots of agencies can do that. You want reach, sure, go to another agency to do that. I think we're more about designing your brand to be remembered. You know, we talk a lot about building cultural reference points. And I think that's what I want this practice to really help supercharge the work that Uncommon is already doing. So I think in this case, I feel we're very integrated already. You know, like I said, the day I started, I was being pulled into so many briefs. And that's just how I personally like to operate as well. And that was such a big plus for me coming into Uncommon. Obviously, we are going to have our own briefs. But equally, I wouldn't want to work in silo when those briefs come in. There's incredible people in the studio that it would be remiss to not have them in the room, because we just want to be able to get to the right thinking. And so in that way, embedded through and through, whether it's an Uncommon studio brief or whether it's a CNI brief, that won't change, I don't think.
I mean, it's worth saying that from the very beginning, we've had questions more fundamental than the channels we operate in at the heart of the studio. And we thought hard enough about those to make sure that they were applicable in design, applicable in advertising, applicable in PR, applicable in physical experience or built environment. You know, seriously, we sort of didn't want channel or industry centered questions. We wanted questions that would lead the studio to a place where we might actually be known in the real world. So I would argue, I mean, take this the odd way. Imagine I said to you that actually Uncommon was a PR studio and always had been. How much work would validate that? I'd argue quite a lot of it. And now I think what we've done is we've really sharpened that offering, and we've developed it, I think, at a pedigree that Randy can take us to, where that stuff now is definitely part of the studio's output, but it's now framed and at a level where we weren't previously playing. And I think that to me is super, super exciting. So the joy here, as Randy said, is like there literally isn't this incredibly weird new set of thinking that's trying to infiltrate an old school agency. There is a whole quite ambitious and audacious set of thinking that Randy's channeling and learning to sort of bring in with her partners to much greater effect on the briefs that she's getting. And that's sort of how it tends to be working. Certainly our early wins are all around the same kind of questions that the studio would always be asked, but in a very pointed way at certain things. So that's kind of how it tends to be going.
You talk about putting out work which is kind of recognised in the real world. How do you do that and make sure that it's not just campaigns going viral and being spoken about in the industry on LinkedIn? How do you get out of that echo chamber with kind of work that has a PR lens, do you think?
We ask pretty fundamental questions of almost every brief that we get, whether it's our own work or it's, you know, with a partner. And these are cultural questions about where the work plays, you know, in terms of the frictions and realities of our world. You know, these aren't like, will this look nice on LinkedIn? We've become very mechanical about fame and the assets that travel. We've become mechanical about creating what we call ideas with a hole in. You know, the idea that it's unfinished, this conversation is unfinished. So we're going to enable people to come in and make their own version of it. We're going to enable people to mechanize it and take the assets they want and share it on their terms. There are like modern codes and mechanics. We're kind of ferocious here. We don't believe in that spirit of luck when it comes to fame at all. And it's almost like machining absolutely everything to matter in the real world. And again, like your question is funny, like we may not always succeed, but how many people are really trying to do that? Name a PR agency that people in the real world know. And I mean that sincerely, not in a horrible way, just name one. There isn't one. So as experts in public discourse and conversation, how could they possibly have forgotten their own brand? And so like Uncommon going for that isn't some sort of deluded pipe dream. It's a strategy. You know, it's us saying, actually, God, what if we woke up one day and we made enough shit that hit to the point where your sister, brother, lover would go, oh my God, I love those fucking guys. That's the dream.
No, and I think when you also just said viral there, Evie, I sort of shriveled a little bit. Not going to lie, just because I think it's one of, you know, I hear it probably in most briefs. I see it in most briefs. I hear it in rooms and I'm like, oh God, here we go. Please don't say viral. Because I think it's one of the most misunderstood words in marketing, because visibility alone means absolutely nothing, right? Plenty of things can go viral and disappear 12 hours later without changing behavior whatsoever. And I think we're much more interested in what happens after you get people's attention. And this, I keep banging on about it, but it's stuff that people remember. You know, it's not being optimized to be seen, but being designed to be remembered. You know, how does an 2 years, 5 years, 10 years time, people look back and go, shit, did you see that thing that Jacquemus did? That was fucking brilliant, And I think that's the type of work that really excites us, because I really do think, and I'm happy to be challenged on this, but as a whole, I do believe the industry mistakes attention for resonance. You see a lot of campaigns or stories that have its kind of 5 minutes of fame and then it's forgotten about. And I call this fast food fame. It's quick and dirty, pumped with a lot of paid activity, or just lacks any of that kind of deeper strategic cultural thinking, because you can buy attention, and we call this rented visibility, but you can't buy belief, the stuff that really connects with people when you're culturally in tune. And so I don't believe the best ideas are media fluent. I really think they need to be culturally fluent. And this is something we've spent a bit of time on to make the practice a bit more distinctive. We've kind of built this product called Codes of Culture. And what it just really does is allow us to look at, I suppose, the broader spectrum of culture that's category agnostic. I've heard in too many conversations, people go, oh yeah, culture, how do we get into music? How do we get into fashion? And you're going, is much more deeper than that. And I think working really closely now with our head of data, who's just come in, who's brilliant, is really gives us now the advantage to get a deeper understanding into, as Nils is kind of talking about, like the tensions, the problems and opportunities for brands to really have cultural impact, but also now a way for us to then be able to measure that. Because I think this is the other thing that the PR industry maybe hasn't quite cracked. We're still talking in, I think I saw the other day, EMV as a mode to measure success. And I was like, no, please, how are we still talking about earned media value? That's so old school. So, I think it's being a lot more sophisticated and talking about what does cultural impact look like? How are we shifting perception and behavior? How do you really generate strong meaning in something that people actually go away and think about? You share you in WhatsApps, talk about their families with, and I think that's the magical stuff that I don't mean to sound like a nerd, but absolutely get excited by and want to bring in more people. And I think coming into Uncommon, you really feel that from everyone.
I mean, going back to the point about agencies making a name for themselves, I think that's something that Uncommon kind of stands out for. Obviously, you've launched a lot of stunts that you've kind of funded yourself as an agency, just kind of passion projects. For anyone who hasn't seen them, there was one earlier this year called Pain, which was an art installation featuring a rigged claw machine that appeared at London Fashion Week. I mean, it's a great PR opportunity for the agency itself. And when we first met Randy, we were kind of having the conversation of how comes more PR agencies haven't done this? Do you think it's purely kind of lack of spare cash that's stopping PR agencies from creating work to kind of promote their own brand, or do they need to start thinking outside of the box more?
I think it's a bit of both. I think probably a lack of spare cash and just not really having that rigor or thought to go, how do we PR ourselves? But maybe the wider ambition of also, I think wanting to, definitely, I feel like people who are listening to this will know what Nils and the rest of the founders really believe in when it comes to when they first started the studio. But what does the studio stand for? And I don't think it's about just what other brands want. It's what's Uncommon stand for. And I think being able to make that level of cultural commentary and invest in doing that really helps us position ourselves as an expert, And I think that's exciting. Like I see the creatives that work on some of these briefs and they're just going, this is brilliant, because I actually get to really push myself in thinking, how do I get people to talk about something that's really important and we get to make a stand on? But I agree. I don't think I've ever seen other PR agencies do that. And actually, equally, other advertising agencies do that.
I just find it crazy. Like if you want to get known in the real world, how could you possibly remain dependent on clients and people, sometimes less imaginative and sometimes less ambitious than you, to make the things you wish existed come true? How could you do that if it really mattered to you? And we are legit a studio in that we will make with or without our partners. And we'll do that in pursuit of our own audience. And go with me here. Like, I think if you stopped and said to most marketeers in any world, do you wish you could borrow Liquid Death's PR people for a week? They'd say, yeah, fucking please. Do you wish you could borrow Jacquemus's thinking? I think that whatever sphere you put us in, making work like Pain, like Rat Boot, like Roach Coat, like all those other things that we do, marks a studio as having its own relationship with real people in the world. And for me, that's the most attractive thing. For anyone going toe to toe with Uncommon, my question is, well, how much do you want it? We don't have more money than anybody else. It's a cop-out. You know, one thing I say to every team I meet, every creative thinker I meet, they always ask me the same advice: what would you give to yourself or a younger person? Literally create an ability to make something famous on your own, because you will be the most needed, the most wanted, the most desired human figure. Because anybody able to do that is a kind of magic. And it's actually not that crazy to do it. And we talk, again, like I said, like we talk psychopathically, mechanically about it, which is we won't come up with ideas that need a deep partnership, £1 million, 4 years of runway and whatever. That's a get out that everyone knows we all exist in. We were going to do it, but we realized we just remove those ideas, man. We won't do those. We talk about the literal distance between an idea and reality, and we say to ourselves, okay, how do we remove that distance? And then how pragmatically can we make this happen, you know, on our own budget? And we do it literally in pursuit of our own name, being out there and being associated with creative, original, provocative thinking. That's what we do. And we've got loads more of those coming, you know, and those are coming out of the PR practice, they're coming out of the design practice. But I think it's hugely important for studios to make their own work.
Is it just a case of kind of people from the team coming to you with an idea and then you just make it happen? Simple as that.
But it's in the studio's culture. I mean, forgive me, I don't mean to be weird about it, but they're not passion projects. They are an output. You know, in the same way we make feature films. We made the Nick Cave documentary. We've made In Camera. We've made Grief to Sing with Feathers. The reason we do those things is to develop a relationship in culture that people understand and to be seen for it. So they are really important as the partnerships we have with our clients to the studio. So when they're on a job sheet and we decide we're doing them, they're up there with EA, with Insta, with all the people that we're working with. And they're just as important that they happen on time with the right level of execution. But yeah, I mean, sometimes we'll have an idea around a moment in culture. We'll be like, we have to exist then. The New York guys are obsessed with Fashion Week. They basically launched around the time of Fashion Week in New York, which for me, having been there for that time, is literally, I've never seen a more socially charged city, and in particular, a more socially charged 16 blocks in a city than Soho during Fashion Week. And that's where the studio is. So the guys are like, we are just going to own this every year. So watch this space. But we have sort of moments and markers in the year, and we just have ideas that come along and we're like, we just have to do that. We've got a technology idea about to drop that I'm really, really excited about. It's kind of a utility, but not really. It's disguised as a utility, but it's more classic, uncommon nonsense. But I think that's going to be a lot of fun. But we think those ideas are massively important. Lastly, like, if you didn't believe anything I just said, and I asked you to come up with a way of attracting clients that will show them that for not a lot of money, you can make them famous, why wouldn't you just make famous work for yourself for not a lot of money?
Fair enough. The idea you spoke about there, really interesting. I wondered if you can kind of give us a bit of a hint of what else you've got planned for the rest of this year, kind of from the PR, cultural and influence standpoint. You can be vague if you need.
My visual mind, it's got ... to TBC. I can't say too much, but all I can say is it is going to be a really exciting year. I honestly did not think coming in this year would look like what it looked like, but I think we've had such exciting wins. There's such exciting work that's going to be going out the door. I mean, there's already been exciting work that's gone out to the door, particularly with The Ordinary and marque mache, and you've just seen the absolute gold that's come out of that. Is that enough to satisfy you?
I would say, well, look, I would say the marque mache is a really good example of the cultural practice in full effect here. If you look at the other work we made for The Ordinary, albeit excellent, I think the marche has taken that to levels we have never played in before. Like, whether you like it or hate it, it's undeniably infamous. And I do think whether people hate this or love this, people are going to talk about that in 3 years. They're going to be like, a bit like that marque mache thing. And the shape of it, activating not just in one country, but in loads, creating assets that people can make their own, creating a literal scarce place, physical place for people to go, a narrative experience that people can create in their own image and then share and put out themselves. I think all of those values to the stuff that Randy's talks about are huge. There's other work we've launched too that's like that. But I will say that the launch of this practice has seen one client in particular, but two now, that I've wanted to work with for the whole lifespan of the studio that we've not managed to work with, who have now come along and knocked on the door and said, we would love to work with your culture and PR arm. So that's been insane, you know, and that's been clearly something that maybe some people have been waiting for, but I'm mad excited about some of that work. And like everything else in the studio, there aren't scales or levels of import. Some of the briefs we're getting in this practice within the studio now are bigger than the briefs we're getting elsewhere already, you know, and that's daunting but thrilling. So yeah, you'll see. You guys can be the judge. Let's see. You can see what we make of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all sounds great. Any other kind of parting words for the PR industry to anyone, agencies listening who maybe were a little bit shaken by the launch? Anything else?
I have a bit, which is, look, I am in the design practice. It's a little bit more advanced than our culture and PR are. And when we kicked it off, there were similar voices of dissent. A bunch of people saying we didn't know what the fuck we were doing and we were an ad agency, who didn't understand that the studio had launched with those things. And a bunch of people saying, oh my God, it's New World and whatever, and you're not going to get it and whatever. The best thing about our design practice in the world is that we bring the thinking that's fueled our brand thinking and our advertising thinking into it, and it makes it original. And the same is true of our culture and influence practice. We're bringing design thinking in, experience thinking, physical built environment, all of those other things. And I would just say to anybody listening, if they cared or wanted to learn from any of this, it's that I think, honestly, with AI, with replication, with the industry the way it is, with payment the way it is, the common conversation in the PR industry is how much people are paid and what the value of their advice and worth is. Whether or not you think it's a good time or a bad time, you've never had a bigger excuse to just fucking try to do something original. Ever. And I just wish more people saw that. That's all I'd say. The way my quote was framed, it was a bit like I was saying, fuck everybody. And like, I really wasn't. We're very candid here. We challenge each other in the studio in that way. What I was hoping to do was be a part of a scene. Honestly, I'm fascinated about scenes, the YBAs, the Brutalists, whatever. Whether we like it or not, this is a scene that we all exist in at the moment. It's either a good one or it's a forgettable one. And I just think that we have the chance to be part of something absolutely insane. People will talk about this time in our industry's history. They just will. And the only question will be whether you're a part of that conversation or not. And isn't that the actual gift of PR?
There we go, yeah. Well, there's a challenge for the PR listeners. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for today, but thank you both so much for joining me and sharing your perspectives. Really interesting to hear that. Thanks to you two for listening, and until next time, goodbye.